July the 1st, 2020, Canada Day here in Canada, which is the equivalent to the 4th of July in the US. So happy Canada Day to everyone out there. This is Hannibal, of course, from the HannibalTV.com with a news update for you. Unfortunately, I have some sad news to report for anyone that's aware of who Killer Tim Brooks was. He had worked in the U.S., held the NWA Pacific Northwest Tag Team Championships with Roddy Piper in both 78 and 79. He was part of World Class Championship Wrestling as a television champion. He was also the NWA Texas Heavyweight Champion. He had 3 NWA Texas Tag Team Championship reigns with Stan Hansen, Leroy Brown, and Stan Stasiak. So he's unfortunately passed away at only 72 years old. So that's about the same age as my father. I wish my father would go to the gym and actually exercise. He convinces himself that he's healthier than all of his friends, yet his friends are passing away. And he had a heart attack when he was in his 40s. So I wish he would wake up. I didn't know Killer Tim Brooks, but seeing that he's passed away at the same age as my father, that's what it makes me think of. But sorry to hear about that for any of the Tim Brooks fans out there. I reported yesterday that WWE was holding a mandatory conference call with NXT UK talent on Tuesday, and some were speculating that WWE might be throwing in the towel for NXT UK as it hasn't been a money-making brand. They haven't even run an event since I think either February or March. I'm not sure if there's even any further events announced, but they've also released a bunch of wrestlers from NXT UK. I guess the conference call was not about them closing down the territory, though. They did take action against several UK talents. We reported last week that Ligero, whose real name is Simon Musk, and Travis Banks, Travis Blight, were released for speaking out related stuff last week. And I guess on this conference call, the company confirmed that referees Joe Allen and Chris Roberts were released and Joe Coffey was suspended, all due to speaking out allegations. And if any of you look at the screenshot I used for this video, do you notice that Triple H is like 6 inches to a foot taller of all the NXT UK talent? I just find that funny. For some reason, NXT UK is full of little pint-sized brawlers. But basically, I guess the conference call was, according to the Wrestling Observer, mostly Triple H telling the talent explicitly what the protocol was from WWE's side regarding sexual abuse allegations, and they're going to have a zero tolerance policy to any charges where there's irrefutable evidence against any of their talent. So it was more of a warning call than anything. It looks like they're going to keep trudging through with this NXT UK. I don't know when the last house show NXT UK ran. I don't think they did any house shows in 2020. If they did one in 2019, feel free to let me know in the comments. And if someone wants to let me know in the comments when the actual last NXT UK show was, please let me know. From my understanding, there's no like regular training for these NXT UK talents. That's why some of them are allowed to wrestle for other companies in the UK. So yeah, that's the update for the UK. I did listen to Steve Austin uploaded one of his classic podcasts with Vince McMahon, and when I was driving home from the gym tonight, since I got to travel to Quebec to work out because here in Ontario, the gyms are still closed. But you know what? I'm loving being back training. I actually am so happy to be back in the gym, and I'm still gonna run tonight after I'm done this. Drinking my coffee that my dog bought me this mug. But what stood out to me about that call or the podcast with Vince McMahon and Steve Austin, which was an older podcast, but Vince McMahon arguing with Steve Austin that his entertainers are not wrestlers, that they're storytellers, and that the WWE tells stories. So once again, why do they have wrestling in the name? Change it to World Storytelling Entertainment if you're insistent on never shutting up, that you do nothing but tell stories, which is not cool, okay? It's not cool. If I'm approaching a bunch of teenagers, let's say it's Canada Day here, so there's fireworks. There's a park across the street from my house. If I go up to that group and tell them about this great show, it's a bunch of half-naked men, oiled up, telling stories. They're not actually fighting for real. They're just telling stories to entertain you guys. And you got to check this out. They would just laugh at me. And I couldn't even tell them, hey, look, this guy's really cool, because there's no one really on the roster that is legitimately cool. The coolest one would be Brock Lesnar, who's not even active right now. So that's my opinion on that. Vince McMahon also talked about CM Punk and that, and it's funny listening to it now, because he was saying even back then that he would be willing to work with CM Punk in the future. But since the WWE backstage show was such a flop, it's funny thinking back, like whenever that was recorded, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, that there was still some people thinking that CM Punk could potentially pop a number. But I think it's been proven with Backstage being canceled after 6 months or so that those two pathetic performances in the UFC really killed any credibility that Punk had. Speaking of UFC, by the way, last Saturday's UFC Fight Night, the main card did a 0.43 rating. So Raw on Monday did a 0.49 with Ric Flair, with the Big Show. That UFC Fight Night, I don't think there was any main stars on that UFC Fight Night show, and it did a 0.43. No John Joneses, no Conor McGregors. Actually, most of the big stars in the UFC now, including Amanda Nunes, are saying they might never even fight again for UFC. So that could be a problem for UFC as time goes on. But they have large TV and pay-per-view deals just like WWE does. All right, I'll answer some of your questions. Gordo Scarface says that I should have my father eat green vegetables, can prevent heart disease. I really try, and I probably will see him at some point today for Canada Day. And I'm going to actually bring it up about this guy because his brother, who's actually in better shape than him, had a heart attack just a couple of months ago. And then I see his brother's drinking wine in a Facebook post. Literally weeks after his heart attack. So some people just, I don't know, when you're overweight and in your 70s, you should focus on your health. And if you want to talk about my father for 1 second, he's also a workaholic. He's 72. He should have retired years and years ago. He's still working. And he just works for the city. He's not even making any money. He's making the same that his pension would pay him. But I won't get into a tirade on that because I don't understand it. I guess he thinks he's going to live forever and just work up until the day that he dies. Alberto Del Taco, am I going to watch AEW tomorrow? No. Hell no. Hell no. Actually, my gym in Quebec is still open for Canada Day tomorrow because in Quebec, they don't really celebrate Canada Day. For people that don't know, Quebec actually tried to separate from Canada at one point. So they have a different day. They celebrate Saint Jean-Baptiste Day. So one says, does NXT UK have any heavyweights? I think they have Walter. That's about it. And Walter wrestled PCO in a match that was like the highlight match of WrestleMania weekend a few years ago. And I think Walter ended up in WWE out of that match. PCO ended up in Ring of Honor out of that match. So I don't know if either of them have had a match more famous than that WrestleMania weekend match they had a few years ago since moving on to bigger companies. Ellen Degenerate, am I going to have stem cells in the future for that medical treatment? Who knows? I don't know much about it. Thank God I'll knock on my desk here. Thank God I'm in good health right now. I was in great health till I found out I had a very small skin cancer patch on me. Then I got it removed, which I also had to go to Quebec for because I was able to pay for it since my medical insurance doesn't cover me in that province. But it seems like Ontario, everything is still closed, except for liquor stores and bars are now open, but gyms aren't. Big Richard says CM Punk couldn't pop a balloon. Very, very, very funny. I agree. Raj Bak says Ric Flair is just in WWE for the payday. I will give Ric Flair credit, though, for being like a man. I guess he's back owning the phrase, the man. And he is the man. Even at 70-something, I don't know what age of his 70s he's in. We have guys like Kevin Owens making in the millions. Sami Zayn, in at least the mid 100,000s. I believe I read he was making like 500,000 a year. Could be wrong, but he's making in a good chunk of change. Randy Orton didn't appear on Raw. Roman Reigns is sitting out, and these guys are all multimillionaires. But Ric Flair is a man. He is still showing up because he is a wrestler's wrestler. So I will give Ric Flair credit. You are still a man. Ric Flair, you are more of a man than anyone else on the WWE roster. You are a team player, and I admire you for a guy that almost died a few years ago. You're a senior citizen. You're at risk for actually being in serious trouble if you catch COVID-19, yet you're still performing. So wrestlers don't have that work ethic, and that reminds me also something Vince McMahon said on that Steve Austin podcast, because even a few years ago, it's just as true today. There are no new stars since John Cena. And you know what Vince McMahon said? One of the reasons he believes why? Because wrestlers today do not have the work ethic of wrestlers from the past. They are lazy. So, yes, I'll agree with Vince McMahon on that. Krilling876 tipped me $2 and says, when is the Warlord interview? It's supposed to be on Thursday. He still works in the security industry, and a bar that he works at opened up last week on the day we were originally talking about doing the interview. So it is going to be this Thursday that I do that Warlord interview. My Jimmy Corderas interview is up in full free now. I encourage you to watch that one. My Darren McBee interview, former wrestler, American Gladiator, been in so many movies. Really, really cool guy. That one's up at patreon.com/the Hannibal TV. Big Richard says Ric Flair respects the business. One last thing. Wine has resveratrol, is good for you, but alcohol isn't. Drink in moderation. Yes, for the guy saying that wine is good for you, that's why I try and avoid alcohol, to be perfectly honest with you, as much as possible, because I am not the type, as far as alcohol, like I don't ever have cravings for it, really. I'll only drink wine if really someone offers to me. I won't actually buy it otherwise. Same with beer. But if I get enough, if I go past, like, I don't know, I can handle a good amount, but I can get pretty wild. And like, I'm like a Ric Flair style partier, where if I get past the point of no return, I could end up spending thousands of dollars in a night, and the night can end up being crazy. So it's best that I stick with water and coffee and tomato juice and other things like that. Ed from Queens tipped me $10 and says, how old was Abdullah the Butcher the last time I fought him? And was he a strong guy? He was 68 years old, I think, the last time I fought Abdullah the Butcher. So above, like, he couldn't even, okay, Abdullah the Butcher, the last few times I fought him, actually, he was in a full walker. Now he's got so fat that he's in a wheelchair. But before then, he was so fat, he was even having problems walking. He would literally need to lean on a manager to walk to the ring. And as you're wrestling him, you need to like hold him up or have him so he's leaning against the ropes or leaning against the ring to get him in the ring. If any of you have seen the matches where I actually had to get him in the ring, it's actually like pushing him in the ring, because this guy was like 500 some odd pounds of blubber. And yeah, he was a big old fat guy, not strong. No, not at all strong. Actually, I'll tell you a funny story. If any of you have seen that video clip of when Abdullah the Butcher attacked the TV show host on a show that we appeared on together, this was not planned. He grabbed the TV show host in a headlock, and there was going to be a cooking segment after Abdullah and I were on. He ended up ruining the cooking segment because he took the plate. It was full of food, shoved the food in the TV show's face. Then he takes the plate, smashes the plate over the TV show host's head. Then his head starts bleeding. I didn't know what Abdullah was going to do, but he had him in a real headlock. So I had to go in there and separate Abdullah from this TV show host's face. And blood was flowing. It was crazy. It was pandemonium and panic. This was like a morning talk show on daytime local television that nothing ever happened on. The camera crew was going nuts. The producers were going nuts. I actually thought they were going to call the police. So just thinking about how out of shape Abdullah was those last few years, I remember I needed a van to drive him around in because he's so big. And I remember I was telling him after this, when they were like yelling, cut, go to break, cut, go to break, I thought they were going to call the cops. I'm like, we got to get out of here, Abdullah. Because like he basically assaulted the guy and he was supposed to wrestle that night. And if there's anything I've learned from my years of security is get the hell out of there before the cops come. So I'm pushing Abdullah, getting him to move. But then the hard part was getting him in the van. I remember for some reason when we got to the van, like it was fairly high, so like he just would not go in. So I remember I was practically body checking his ass to get the momentum going so we could get in the van, so we could get the hell out of there. And yeah, it was a bad scene. That was a crazy moment with Abdullah, something you could do in most of his career. You have to remember, he started wrestling, I think, in 1947 or so. So he's been around when you could assault people and get away with it. He was known for blading fans, blading photographers, and no one would ever do anything. But I think that was in the year 2007-ish. So it was very, you couldn't get away with the same stuff. Luckily, they didn't press charges against him. They just tried to get him to pay for a new suit, which he didn't do. So yeah, it was a bad scene. But yeah, just as far as how fat Abdullah was, I just remember I was like 285, 290 at that time, and it was taking all my strength to shove him into the van so we could get the hell out of there. Krilling is also asking me another $2 tip. Thank you for the $2 tip. Why do I think Scott Hall's son isn't in WWE? I don't know if Scott Hall's son is even wrestling anymore. I've never met him. I did hear at one point he was wrestling for Pro Wrestling Noah in Japan. Who knows? Maybe at one point he was offered something and maybe something happened that we don't know about. I don't know. He seems to be a big muscular guy, so yeah. Oh, and someone that was actually around for that Abdullah situation is commenting. Max Moskal from Moscow. Multimedia. A lot has changed since then. You can't pull that off anymore. The fact that the cops didn't show up at the Terry Funk press conference segment you did blows my mind. And that is another fact, that when we did that Terry Funk press conference scene, I did kind of get too involved in my character. And at one point, people were freaked out, for one thing. But at one point, I pushed over a table that was full of glass. And the hotel was, first of all, very mad about the scene that Funk and I made, but second of all, furious about the broken glass. So yes, we were lucky, and it's amazing. That was 10 years ago, and the Abdullah incident was like 13 years ago. Social media has grown so much since then that those little cases, those little situations didn't even get out really, other than to the local areas. If that Abdullah assaulting the TV show host had happened now, it would have probably been worldwide news, but at that time it was only local news. So you're correct, Max. Crazy how times has changed. Nice to see you on here. He just reached 1 million+ subscribers on his home hardware or his home renovation channel. So congratulations to you. And yeah, YouTube was just getting going in 2010, as he said. Now YouTube is taking over TV. I watch YouTube now instead of TV. That's a fact. So have a good night, everyone. Thanks for the tips. Thanks for the comments. Have a good one, Max.